to find things that you will enjoy, that are valuable, that are healthy, that are, you know, strengthening and empowering for you, instead of you doing things that are destructive and harmful to yourself or others. So that's basically what we're trying to do. Okay, so we're real quickly going to talk about sensitivity theory. This is relatively recent. It is research-based, and it takes a look at human motivation. It's different from Maslow, it's different from Erickson, it's different from Freud, it's different from all of these, because it is based on data. Okay, thousands and thousands and thousands of surveys were done, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of interviews were done all across the world. Okay, so this is not, you know, a theory that grew out of observation and then try and make everything fit. This was collect all of the data and see what it seems to say. Okay, so that's what we're talking about, and basically we're trying to address what are the things that people fundamentally desire, understanding that those things are going to be different for all of us. Okay, so a fundamental motive is something that reinforces behavior in nearly everyone. Okay, it motivates a substantial amount of your everyday behavior. So it's a fundamental motive if it makes you want to do what you do. Okay, it's the kind of stuff that gets you up in the morning, and it can't be explained in combination with a bunch of other motives. So you can't say, well, it's all part of this and part of this and part of this. It's actually a fundamental motive is it stands alone to explain a good deal of behavior. Okay, because there are a whole lot of things that could be considered motivational. Okay, like money could be considered motivational. Okay, but the truth is that it's not money that's motivational, it's what money lets you do that's motivational. Does that make sense? Okay, money is just the access to it. Okay, you know, there's some people who, you know, say that their faith is motivational. Okay, the truth about that is that they have chosen their faith and belief structure because it supports an internal morality that they've decided to adopt. Does that make sense? And then whatever structures they use to support that morality, because some people are very, very spiritual and they're very connected at that level, but they're also, or they're very moral people, they're very ethical people, but they're not at all religious. Do you understand the difference? Okay? So we're talking about trying to make sure that we're real clear about what are the fundamental things, so that, because this is not something that he just sat down one afternoon and drew up. Okay, these are things that came out of the research. So the fundamental motives can be talked about in terms of goals and sensitivities. The goals are things that you're trying to achieve or work towards or get more of. Sensitivities are things that you're trying to figure out how to get away from. Things you're trying to avoid, things you don't want to have happen in your life. Okay, so there are two different primary groupings, things I'm trying to get more of and things I'm trying to get away from. And we found that there are 15 fundamental motives, and for the folks that we're going to be working with, folks who have severe, persistent involvement with mental health kinds of things, people who have cognitive disabilities, people who have been environmentally, emotionally deprived for extended periods of time, and are dysfunctional in those, you know, in trying to cope with those lack of experiences. All of those things kind of come together, okay? So, you know, with the folks that you guys are working with, that's definitely, this is your population. These are your people, okay? So this is from Dr. Stephen Reese did the original with Susan Haverkamp back in 1998 when it was released, and then updated in 2000. When he, actually this is a great story, I was in Israel doing some work, and Stephen Reese was there at the same time, and we were actually on a bus going to Haifa from Jerusalem. And I've known Stephen for years and years and years, and he was sitting on the bus beside me as we're going through, and we're watching all these, they look like they're teenagers. I mean, and many of them are actually, because when you're like 16, 17 years old, you go into the military service. And so you see all these 16-year-olds standing around with, you know, AK-47s on their shoulders, making sure that the terrorists don't hassle the buses. It's a weird experience, okay? to see kids that are, you know, a third year age, they're standing there with big guns. But we're on the bus, and he started telling me about this research, and I just was like, dude, do you have any idea how big this is? I mean, this can make all kinds of difference in people's lives. And Stephen Reese is known kind of as the godfather of dual diagnosis of folks who have both intellectual disabilities and mental illness, or severe behavior problems at the very least. And he was like, well, go for it, you know, do something with it, you know, do good. And so over the years, you know, it's like, from that point on, I couldn't focus on, you know, the trip or whatever else, because it's like my brain was just stirring. I got back, and Susan Haverkamp, who did the research with him, who I also had known for a while, she moved to about a mile from my house. So it made it a whole lot easier to do the work suddenly. So I'm believing that this was a divine ordination here, that we're supposed to have done that. All right, so bottom line is that this is just people trying to get what they need, the way they perceive their need to be. Added to this theory is the premise that barriers to obtaining what would be considered normal or normative that often exist within the typical service systems. I mean, things that you want to do that you're not allowed to do because you live in the group home or whatever, can actually make things substantially worse for folks. Sexuality is one of those things that kind of comes to the forefront of thinking for anybody who's done any work for any extended period of time in the system. And, you know, it's all this, you know, push it down, push it down, push it down, push it down, push it down. And then what happens? You know, it's like, well, if all sex is bad, and I'm going to be in trouble no matter what I do, then I might as well go for the gusto. You know, let's have something really good here as a result. Okay, so my point is that we don't want to create dysfunctional behavior. So part of what we've got to do is figure out how do we change the way we've been thinking, behaving, interacting with folks that seems to be denying a fundamental motive, so that we're not actually making things worse for folks. The desire of the service organization to change people's behavior to conform with that. So it's like the more I try and make you do or not do something, the more likely it is that I'm going to actually have more behavior problems, not less behavior problems. And that we know. I mean, there's not even an argument there anymore. It's the more I try and make you do what I want you to do, the more likely it is that you're going to fight me over it. Even if you didn't really mind doing it, but you really don't want to be told to do it. Anybody here ever have that? It's like, you would have done it had they asked you, but the minute they told you you had to do it, it's like you didn't want to do it anymore. And somebody said, will you help me? You know, it's like, oh, sure, I'll help you. But when they tell you, you have to, it's like, I do not. It's that oppositional defiant behavior that just kind of sits in the back of our heads, just waiting for an opportunity to come out. So, anytime that we wind up with that inherent conflict of, you know, those kinds of things, we have an increase in the likelihood that we're going to have problem behaviors. And then motivation needs are also a cause, or at least a contributing destabilizing factor that results in some of the mental health and behavioral manifestations. So that's what we have learned from our research using these assessments and these processes. When we first started looking at people who had significant disabilities, and we looked at all these behavior plans that everybody was on. I mean, it was like they had behavior plans that were way more than they did. You know, I mean, they had, a couple of people had full filing cabinets that were just dedicated to them and their behavior problems and all that other kind of stuff. And it was like, at some point you have to go, maybe we should try something pretty radically different. And so what we started doing, and Poindexter and I started looking at the whole issues of how do you help manage anxiety, and so we wrote a book about that stuff. And but the more we got into this and we started doing these assessments with folks, we found some things that we're going to share with you later on about the numbers that come out of this. It's like, ooh, this is a warning number. This is like a not good number. And this is like, oh, this is a bad number, this is a scary number, and this is a, you better fix this tomorrow number. Okay, so we started finding some of these things that were coming out of it. It's like, we saw people that were going into crisis, and so when they scored above a 63 in any one category, it was, that's not good. And they were likely to go into crisis in a very short period of time. And so we started looking at, we weren't trying to find these things. We were going, backwards afterwards, saying, okay, well, what happened here? And so basically what we found is that if we don't pay attention to these things, we're asking for trouble, is what it comes down to. Okay? All right. So, is there anybody in your family suffering insanity? No, sir. We all seem to be enjoying it. So the enjoying of insanity is, the reality is that if you don't think it's insane, it doesn't bother you. It may bother everybody else, but it doesn't necessarily bother you because it's how you do, right? As my son would say, that's how we roll. So it's, that's just the way things get done for you. So if you're not suffering from it, then it's not insane. It's only when you're suffering that you start calling it insane. The problem is that we've got a whole lot of folks that we've been working with who have been suffering for a long period of time, and we haven't been able to figure out what the heck is going on. And they've been pretty freaking miserable for a long time. And what we've got to do is, this is going to help us do is figure out what we're going to do instead. All right. So this is an effort to try and provide some objective data, and part of the way we provide some of this objectivity to it is by having multiple people participating in the assessment, so that it's not a person that sits down and goes, well, I think they're, because that's what happens, it's like when the same psychologist does the same review of the same person, every year or every, 18 months or whatever it is. The truth of the matter is that about 87.5% of that is regurgitation from the previous years. Psychologists, I know. It's like, oh, well, we already did the history, and we already did the social, and we already did that. And it's like, okay, well, what really happened? Not a hell of a lot. They're still messed up. And so, we formulate some squishy kind of recommendations that nobody really actually understands, and we don't know how to implement. And good, it's in the file for another year. And isn't that a great way to do a Medicaid billable moment? The problem is that it's of no real benefit in many, many cases. That's not to say that psychologists and psychiatrists have no benefit. That's not my point. I'm saying the way we have done the assessments historically have not been typically useful for us, and the reports that come out of those assessments haven't been. But if I can get 3, 4, 5 people to participate, then we can get some more different kinds of data and have some objectivity applied to it. But Michael Small, when he started doing his training on essential lifestyle planning, started this conversation about what was important to somebody and what was important for somebody. You guys familiar with that language? Okay, so, something that's important to me, okay, is a nice car. Okay, that's the thing that I've decided that's important to me. I'm getting old. I deserve luxury. I work hard. I deserve luxury. I like going fast when I want to. I deserve luxury. You understand what I'm saying? It's like my mind has said it's important to me to have an infinity. Okay? Boom. Important for me is to drive safely. Important for me is to be able to make the monthly payments. Important for me is to have a relatively safe car because I'm notoriously not all that good at driving safely. I have this history, okay, in the past, it's a one, that my insurance company doesn't want to seem to let me forget. But do you understand that? So I've got to figure out how do I take what's important for me and make it work with what's important to me if I'm going to have a real